Ivan, we're going to give it just a couple of minutes for folks to log in and then we'll get started. Just about one more minute and we'll get started. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm Tom Walker. I'm the Executive Director at Encore Outpatient Services. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar series, DMV Neighbors in Treatment and Recovery, a spotlight on local resources, program, and expertise. Over the past several months, we've highlighted providers in the DMV region to provide you with insights and resources you can utilize in your practice. We will be conducting these sessions in a webinar format. All participant microphones will be muted. During the presentation, please utilize the Q&A feature to ask any questions you may have. We will have time at the end of the presentation for Q&A, and as questions come up in the middle, I may interrupt Dr. Gaudia Smith and ask those questions, so feel free to post them at any time. Today we welcome Dr. Anita Gaudia Smith, award-winning author and psychotherapist in Washington, D.C., who specializes in addiction, recovery, and relationship issues. Dr. Gaudia Smith has served as a consultant to the U.S. Congress on parity legislation for substance abuse treatment. She has also spoken nationally and internationally on radio, television, and other media on addiction treatment. Today, she will be speaking on the topic of growth and recovery. Please welcome Dr. Anita Gaudia Smith. It's all yours.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Anita Gaudia Smith, and thank you for the honor of being with you for little while this morning, and thanks to Caron for putting this together and having me. I appreciate the introduction. I would just say a little bit about who I am and what I do, and then my topic for today is growth and recovery. So as Tom just said, I am a psychotherapist and author and media consultant in the Washington, D.C. area. I practice in Georgetown and Bethesda, two locations in the larger area, and have been in the field for about 25 years. And although I specialize with addiction and recovery issues and relationship issues, I do a wide variety of mental health treatment. I'm also a person in long-term recovery myself. I've been sober for 30 years, and so addiction and recovery is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart and to my experience. What I've seen working in the field and being highly involved in the recovery community for the last 3 decades is that the growth process is quite different for everyone. There's no one process that everyone goes through because people come to recovery from different places at different ages and different points in their development and different stages of life. However, I have identified 3 main phases of recovery that I want to talk about today. So while these might not all apply to everyone, this is just kind of a general overview for what I have seen over the past 30 years and also what I've experienced myself. So it comes from 2 directions, through observation and clinical practice, and also through living the journey as well. So here are the 3 phases, just to kind of give you the outline of what I'm going to talk about. There's early recovery, middle recovery, and later recovery. And in the early recovery phase, the first thing that we have to go through is dealing with post-acute withdrawal. And this is a term that a lot of people who go to treatment hear about this, learn about it. And people who don't go to treatment, maybe not quite as much. But post-acute withdrawal is the first phase, and it lasts up to about the first 2 years. And it's a very difficult time in recovery from a purely physical standpoint, because the whole body is recalibrating and reorganizing. All of the basic functioning systems have to find a new equilibrium when the drugs and alcohol are removed. And so when we go through this phase in early recovery, we have to learn to tolerate dysphoria, feeling bad. People have a lot of anxiety, depression, intense feelings of loneliness, dealing with sleeplessness, and it can just be a very difficult, unsettling time, feeling very raw. Emotions and physical sensations can change very quickly, even from hour to hour in the beginning. And of course, some of this depends on your detox process and what you're coming off of and the amount of time that you've been using. Obviously, people who've been using for longer periods of time tend to have longer post-acute withdrawal periods and greater symptoms. Not everyone expects this because a lot of people think that if they just stop using, everything will be okay and that they're going to feel great, and are not always prepared for the fact that after you stop using, it can get really tough and really hard to tolerate being with yourself all the time without any anesthesia. Another aspect of post-acute withdrawal, because the fluctuations are so frequent and sometimes severe, is learning to modulate your own impulsivity. With the life of someone drinking or drugging, there is a lot of impulsive behavior, the high highs, the low lows, and the not quite seeing the big picture and thinking things through, because the immediate desire is to just feel better and do whatever it takes to feel better as quickly as possible. And if you have physical withdrawal, then of course the immediate desire is to get out of withdrawal as quickly as possible, as easily as possible, and with the least expense. And this can become a full-time job just in and of itself. But the impulsivity and the ability to delay gratification is something that has to be cultivated later. And most of us don't have it in the beginning because we're just used to, get me out of this feeling. I want what I want when I want it, and I'll do whatever it takes. And, you find sometimes desperation and, people doing things that they would never ordinarily do because they're just hopeless and desperate in the throes of the addiction. And regulation of the self is part of this. In early recovery, we have to get a rhythm to life and some sort of order and routine. It's very helpful to have a routine in the morning. That's when the climate is set for the day. I call it, setting the table for the day. And a morning routine can include now meditation, exercise, stretching, readings, journaling, and now we have Zoom meetings. So it's very easy to do meetings in the morning, where before it required a lot more planning and scheduling. So all of these things are available in a morning routine. And what I've been advising people during COVID, because a lot of people are home all day long right now, is to break up your day into 3 parts. The first part of your day for self-care, the second part of your day for work, and the final part of the day for rest, relaxation, and play. And it really does make a difference to have structure. It's essential to have a sense of well-being and just a sense that life is okay. Life is carrying on. Even if we're not going out and going to an office anymore, I've been seeing patients all through COVID with social distancing and also working by phone, and it's worked out really well. But the majority of people are working from home right now, and that routine really does make a huge difference in just, dividing up your day and having some structure to it. And for early recovery, it's really essential, because most people in early recovery have been dysregulated for a period of time, and regulating your activity helps to regulate your emotions, and that helps also to regulate your body. And all of these work together, because with addiction, the disease operates on the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual dimensions. And so we have to attend to all of those and take care of them all. Recognizing feelings and modulating our affects is another huge part of the first phase of recovery. Most people in early recovery are not aware of what they're feeling. Like, they know they feel good, they know they don't feel good. Maybe they're scared or anxious. Even anxiety is not always clear, because anxiety can come out as anger for a lot of people. But learning to recognize what we're feeling and then put a name on it is an important part of the first phase. There's a condition called alexithymia, which means the inability to identify what one is feeling. As an adjective, upcoming being Alexa, stop. Position or greater in some Alexa, stop. Position or level. Alexa, stop. I'm so sorry. My Alexa just started talking when I said that word. Anyway, we go through early recovery in the first phase as gracefully as possible, but it's often just, downright hard and painful and difficult. And a lot of us just have to hang on and get through it until things start to get better. And slowly but surely they do. And I remember when I was in early sobriety, even though it's been 30 years, I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was really, really tough. And I would ask myself every month, are you doing better than you were a month ago? And the answer was always yes. And that kept me going, along with going to a lot of 12-step meetings. And I have always wished that I had gone to treatment back when I got sober. Going to treatment was not as much of an option as it is now. There were a few treatment centers around, but a lot more people can go and are able to go now. And it really moves you along in your recovery process so much more quickly than taking the slow route. There's no way to speed up the first phase of recovery. You just kind of have to walk through it and go through it a day at a time and hang on, and know that this whole process does keep improving and getting better and better and better. I've seen a lot of people over the last 6 months who have gotten sober during COVID, and in a way, it's been harder because there aren't live meetings as we were always used to, but in a way it's easier to access meetings because of Zoom, and there are fewer distractions and pressures and temptations, as far as going out and socializing and being around alcohol. And so a lot of people have gotten into treatment and come out and stayed sober during this time. So if you're in the first phase of recovery in your first few years, hold on and just try to stay in the roller coaster car. It levels out, and in the beginning it's sort of, you know, the ups and downs are like this, and then over time they slowly level out, and it just really gets a lot better over time. Now I'm going to move into the next phase of recovery, which is middle phase. And during this phase, the body has leveled out, and we're not going through as many ups and downs because of the sleep and appetite and mood dysregulation and brain dysregulation. But there's still a lot of work to do. And in some ways, the middle phase is actually the hardest phase of recovery. And I would say that, you know, that starts around 5 years till about 15. And in this phase of recovery, one thing that I've seen a lot of people deal with is dealing with other acting out issues. Now, what I mean by that is that when you put down drugs and alcohol, the addictive tendencies and the desire to seek numbness, excitement, and anesthesia, it doesn't go away. And so what happens with a lot of people is that once they stop using, they will find other ways to get high that do not include drinking and drugging. This can include things like toxic relationships, overeating, workaholism, gambling, spending, addictive relationships, sexual acting out. I mean, we can get addicted to almost anything if we have an addictive tendency. And once that first phase is over, I think we become a lot more vulnerable to other acting out behaviors. And what can happen with these other behaviors is that for a while, they're fine. And then if it truly becomes a para-addiction, then over time it will intensify and start making life unmanageable and causing problems. And eventually you'll hit a bottom with it, just like with drugs and alcohol, where you just come to this point where you say, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. And I didn't get sober for this. That's what, you know, you're in a sober emotional bottom when you have that thought that I didn't get sober for this. And some of these things can also kill you. You know, if you think about food addiction and things like that, actually more people in this country die from food addiction and, you know, using their teeth to sabotage and kill themselves than almost any other way. Although the effects of that often show up indirectly and it's not always obvious. But as people in recovery, we're very vulnerable to these other addictions once we put down the drugs and alcohol. Another really easy one is, you know, relationships, right? Because if you put down the chemicals, you can use relationships to excite you and get you high. And there's actually a whole inner drugstore component of endochemicals that are produced by your own body that get released that you can get addicted to. You know, the dopamine and endorphins and, you know, all the oxytocin, all of these chemicals can be very, very powerful and very addictive. And through relationships in particular, it can be very hard to detach and let go of things that are unhealthy for you. We hear a lot of relationship issues going on with people who are in middle recovery. With workaholism, it's a similar thing in that it's the inner drugstore that's activated. With workaholism, it's both an addiction to compulsive activity and an addiction to the adrenaline and the cortisol, which are stimulant natural hormones that You know, like a little bit like speed or cocaine. That high stimulation can be very addictive. And then when you stop, you can have a crash and it can be very depressing. So in middle recovery, we have to really keep watch over what we're doing and recognizing when we're getting into the para addictions. One of the reasons that we get into these other addictions after we get sober is because drugs and alcohol were not the only problem that we had. They were a solution that we thought was helping us. But if there's a lot of stored trauma, grief, or pain inside, then when we put down the drugs and alcohol, we're going to go for something else to numb us in order to avoid dealing with all of that. And that's where the family of origin work comes in. This is extremely important. It's very well addressed in therapy. Many people get an introduction to it in treatment, but in the first 30 days of sobriety and treatment, there's only a limited amount that your brain can absorb because your body's going through so much. And so in middle recovery, the untreated family of origin issues become really critical, and they can create a lot of unmanageability in work, relationships, and so forth. And what we have to do in order to deal with these family of origin issues is to keep digging and going deeper and looking at what might be stored. It's not always clear that you even have stored pain or stored grief or stored trauma from your early life. It takes quite a while to do this work, and my own experience is that I wasn't able to really get down in there until about 15 years of sobriety, when it started. You know, it had been making its way up for a long time, and then it really got my attention because the pain was getting more intense. And I think one of the illusions that we can have is that if we stop drinking and drugging, everything falls into place. And truly, it's an ongoing process of discovery, dealing with issues that maybe we didn't know we had, and continuing to do the work pretty much, you know, as long as you can, as long as you're alive. And there are always new things that come up. There are always things we don't know how to deal with. And in middle recovery in particular, there are things that we didn't even know were inside of us that take a while to make their way up to our consciousness, that we then have to work through, understand, deal with, and heal. And this is one of the most powerful things that can happen in recovery, is getting to the core of the apple with the family of origin issues. We often see the untreated family of origin issues play out in two specific areas: in the workplace and in romantic relationships. So if you continue to have problems in romantic relationships and you feel like you're going through the same thing over and over again and you don't know why, but the common denominator is you, then you might want to take a look at some of this in therapy with someone who really understands addiction and family of origin issues. It's truly hard work, and it's truly the greatest healing that you can have, and extremely freeing. And the point of all of this, you know, the point of recovery is living in freedom, right? We don't want to be in bondage to drugs and alcohol, nor do we want to be in bondage to our negative feelings or toxic relationships or anything. We want to be free. And so continuing to work on recovery and continuing to pursue more growth as time goes on, it just gives you more and more freedom, and it's a beautiful thing. The good news is that there is no limit to the amount of growth and freedom that we can have in this process. And while it's not always easy, it's always worth doing the work. I would say also with relationship issues, one thing that we see a lot is people who unconsciously seek out others who are like their family of origin, both in the positive and negative ways, but we're most strongly attracted to the people who re-wound us in the same way that our parents or siblings might have, not because we're just meant to suffer our whole lives. It's so that we can now take a look at it, work through it, and heal it. And so I offer a lot of hope. I've done this work myself. It has worked out beautifully. And I've been married for 22 years at this time, and am more in love with my husband than ever. And we had a very, very rough start because both of us had a lot of unhealed wounds from our earlier lives. I had never been married. He had been married before several times, and we both had a lot of growing to do and a lot of learning. And I have to say that learning how to love and to be loved is probably the most important thing that we do in life, along with being of service in some way in the world. So moving on to the last phase of recovery, later recovery, the central task that we have in this phase is finding meaning and purpose in our lives and constructing an identity. Now, for people who have come to recovery at a later age, you may have already completed some of these developmental tasks. However, many of us stop growing psychologically and emotionally at the age where we start drinking and drugging. So if you started at 15 or 18, you can stay emotionally stuck for decades, like at the teenage level, psychologically, until you get sober again. It's because the growth stops and really slows down at the age where you start using. And then when you get sober, it picks up again and you start growing up again. So it's not uncommon to see people getting sober in their 40s and 50s who really act like teenagers, because emotionally that's how they feel. And in the lifespan of psychological development, it's in the midlife years that we deal with finding meaning and purpose of our lives. There are 4 issues that we have to deal with in midlife: coming to terms with loneliness, coming to terms with meaning and purpose, coming to terms with death and dying, and coming to terms with personal responsibility, which means that nobody else can solve these issues for us. We have to do it for ourselves. And when you're drinking and drugging, the meaning and purpose part and even the identity is kind of solved by that, right? Because your purpose is to drink every day, you're a partier or whatever, it is that you do. But drinking and drugging when that's taken away, a lot of people feel really lost about meaning and purpose. Like, who am I and what am I supposed to do? I know I felt that way when I got sober, and it was really painful because I felt so far behind everybody else my age. And I was 27 when I got sober. I'm 58 now. And I felt like a 12-year-old when I got sober because my psychological growth had stopped. And I just didn't know who I was and was, just drifting without a clue. But I knew I needed to get healthy. And that's always where you start. Another issue in later recovery is coming to terms with what spirituality means for you. And I differentiate spirituality from religiosity. They can exist together, but not necessarily. There are lots of religious people who are not very spiritual, and there are lots of spiritual people who are not religious, and there are some who are both. And we have an opportunity to come to terms with what spirituality means for us, and what how it plays a role in our lives, and how it can guide us. If you're in a 12-step program and you're familiar with the 12 steps, that is a spiritual program for living. And even though you might not consider yourself a spiritual person, if you use and practice the 12 steps in your life, you are living a spiritual life based on spiritual principles. Even if you don't like the word, you're doing it anyway. And if not, that's okay too. You know, everybody doesn't have to have spirituality, but a lot of people are drawn to it. And the later recovery usually involves the deeper recovery at the level of the soul, and healing that comes in very unexpected ways. Another aspect that can happen in later recovery, or middle, even sooner, is that hidden creativity can come forth. Inside every addiction is a creative gift waiting to come out for the world. And we can all find ways to access our creativity, and to nurture that part of ourselves that is a very important part of the human condition. I know in my case, I started writing books, and actually my grandfather was a very prolific, renowned author. He wrote 48 books in India, and his name was Mansukhal Javeri. And I don't know if it was in my blood, but I just started feeling the urge to write. And so I started writing at about 15 years. And my first book was published at about 17 years sober. And up through now, I've written 5 books, all self-help books that have to do with growth and healing, and one has to do with recovery. But when I have had the experience of writing, it feels like flying. I mean, it's like this beautiful experience on another plane. And that is a part of me that was buried with my addiction. And it was always there, because when I was a little girl, I used to sit at the table when my grandfather would come and visit from India, and I would write poetry and limericks while he was writing his books. And so it was there. It got suppressed with the addiction. Then the addiction was dealt with, and then the creativity started coming forth again. I know a lot of artists and painters and writers, and many of them, before they get sober, or when they first get sober, they're afraid that if they don't drink and drug, they're not going to be creative anymore. And I would say that it's just the opposite. The creativity comes forth in a much stronger way and a more powerful way with sobriety, because in recovery with sobriety, we have full access to who we are, and all that we have to offer and give to the world. And we need to ask ourselves questions like, who am I? What do I have to give? Do I have a gift for the world? And if so, how do I share that gift? Because I want my life to mean something. I want my time to mean something. And on the subject of time is the only thing that we can never get back. It is the most precious commodity that we have. And living in recovery, we don't have to miss any more of our lives than we already missed. I know I missed about 15 years of it, even though I did things. I went to a top 10 university in Baltimore, and went to Hopkins and graduated, but I wasn't really there, and after I got sober and I felt so lost, I decided to go back to grad school And it was a beautiful experience, deciding to become a therapist. And life has just taken on a whole new direction. One of the reasons that I made the decision to go back to grad school was after the first couple of years, I was in therapy and I was just miserable and lost. And my therapist said, "You need to be somebody." And it really sunk in. And, I kind of waited for a while for the answer, and it didn't come. And then I started actively working on it and found my way. So if you're lost, just keep doing the next right thing and keep discovering who you are and keep trying new things and stay with this process, because it's the most amazing experience that you can have, really living life to the fullest and really being fully present for it. So I think I'm going to stop there and open for any discussion or any questions or anything that anybody else would like to talk about. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. And if anybody wants to contact me, my website is FromAddictionToRecovery.com. That's FromAddictionToRecovery.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Smith. There are already a couple questions, and of course, if anyone has any additional questions, please use the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of my screen. I imagine at the bottom of yours as well. One of the questions when you were talking about the middle phase of recovery that was asked is, 15 years is a long time. What could you say to someone to give them hope?
15 years is a long time for what?
I think the question is saying that, in general, you're highlighting that there are a lot of symptoms that occur, at that, 5 to 15 year kind of middle phase. So it could be maybe disheartening for someone to hear that and say, oh my goodness, I'm going to be going through this for so long. Like, what do you say to give folks hope at that point?
Say that everything doesn't happen quickly, and recovery is slow. You have to be patient. You won't be given more challenges that you can handle, but you will get new challenges as time goes on. And that's just reality. People who are not in recovery have the same thing. It's called life. And, there's no point where we've got it all wrapped up and everything's perfect and it's going to stay that way. And so the challenges in early recovery are maybe different than the challenges in middle recovery, than later recovery, but they will keep coming because we're human beings living life. And other people have the same kinds of challenges. They don't think that the solution is to drink and drug, but they do have them. We are very fortunate because we have an arsenal of tools and solutions to deal with life. And we actually have many more resources than other people do. And as time goes on, you're able to find solutions more quickly because of the experience that you have and the time you have behind you. You don't get stuck for long.
Thanks for that. I think that's a great point, that you have so many tools being in recovery and you don't have to be stuck there for long. Also, while you were talking, so I too am in long-term recovery at 23 years, and I really appreciate you talking about like longer term. I mean, 5 to 15 and plus, because we spend so much time focusing on early recovery for folks. What kind of help, what kind of, both professional self-help or what have you, kind of, services or tools should individuals be looking for as their recovery goes on and they start addressing the kind of para addictions and other things you talked about?
So my absolute favorite treatment option is the Caron Breakthrough Program. It's a 1 week, very in-depth program, it's not about drugs and alcohol. It's about, dealing with your family of origin issues. And a lot of people in later recovery do that 1 week program. It's called Caron Breakthrough. I've referred lots of patients. Without exception, every single person has absolutely loved it and gotten great benefit from it. So if you're stuck and you feel like you keep hitting a wall, therapy is extremely helpful. The Caron Breakthrough program is helpful. And then there are other 12-step programs as well that deal with specific issues. I won't go into their names on a public level, but I'd be happy to tell you about them if you want to contact me.
Another question that just came through. Do you feel that someone who has an undiagnosed cognitive delay would be able to complete the family of origin work you mentioned?
An undiagnosed cognitive delay, would that be someone who's in post-acute withdrawal or someone with permanent cognitive damage? Permanent. Am I seeing on the screen? Okay, so if there's permanent damage, I would leave it to the professionals who do the assessment at the breakthrough program to determine whether they're appropriate or not. There's generally a guideline that people with less than 6 months of sobriety are not appropriate, but they do a very in-depth assessment before admitting anyone, and they would be able to make that determination. But I would look into it and try if you're at all interested.
I'm just checking that. Okay. So there's another more specific question just about 12 steps. So a current client won't go to a Zoom 12-step meeting because they want to be anonymous and worry about their email. How can they attend without being identified?
They can phone in, and only the last 3 or 4 numbers will show up of their phone number. So it's very hard to identify. Just using a regular telephone, they can phone into any Zoom meeting. There's no visual, very, very anonymous. And right now there's Zoom meetings all over the world. So you can literally go 24 hours a day, and scheduling is not an issue. If you do want to do the actual Zoom, through the internet, you can also change the name and put up some kind of picture instead of your face.
That's great. And I'll just add too that at this stage of the pandemic, there are actually a good number of in-person meetings available again for folks that are okay with that. I think varying degrees of safety and protocols, but some of those do exist as well for folks that just simply struggle with the Zoom.
And there are also a lot of phone bridge meetings that exist that have nothing to do with Zoom. They've been in place for, the last 10 or 15 years, and every single program has just regular telephone conference call meetings where no one sees anything and you can just stay silent. So telephone meetings are a great option and also very convenient.
That's great. So I had a question that I'm interested in your view on. So in any stage of recovery, but really the later stage of recovery, you were talking about spirituality, and I know that some folks that may not be as spiritual or as interested in the spirituality. I was just wondering, is there a difference in the progression through these phases if someone is not engaged in something like 12-step?
Not necessarily. There are many ways to get sober and stay sober and to experience the life growth journey. I work with lots of people who are not in 12-step and they're doing great and they're in recovery. I mean, there's so many different options out there. And now that we have electronics, we can connect to all kinds of resources and get all kinds of support anytime we want to. And as far as spirituality, it's just a very individual calling, I believe, that if we pursue that in our lives, it's something that we feel from within, and it's not a one-step process. For most people, there's a little pull to do a little something, and then maybe that little pull leads to something else, and maybe that leads to something else. It's a creative and evolving journey, and there's no wrong or right way to do it, and you don't have to do it at all. But if you feel at all interested and you feel any sort of a pull towards it, just check out different things and see what you like. Just explore the world. It's a really big world out there, and there's lots to do. I've done so many different things myself. I've gone to ashrams. I've gone to see yogis in the mountain. I've gone to every faith discipline that exists, you know, all kinds of different services and spiritual teachers and reading and meditation groups, and have fun with it. You know, this is supposed to be fun and enjoyable, and not overly serious, you know, and enjoy yourself.
Thanks. And then just because so many of our our series has been so focused around COVID, do you, and you already touched on some of this in your talk, but do you see COVID and the more virtual kind of meetings and engagement and therapy and recovery having an impact on the, you know, progression through, you know, of growth and recovery?
It has caused us to become more creative about recovery. Maybe not so much for people who are new in recovery, because whatever we're doing now is what they're used to. But for people like me who've been going to live meetings every day for 30 years, it's a big shift and a big change. And I believe that the world of recovery has opened up quite a bit because of COVID. And now recovery is much more global than it used to be. It's more accessible than ever. But it's also showing us how we can adapt our recovery to any and all conditions. And there's absolutely no reason to drink if you don't want to, because there's plenty of support out there. I've actually done a lot of professional work around the effects of COVID with a workshop for the DC Mayor's Office, and some writing for US News and World Report, and some other things which are available on my website. But there are tremendous gifts that have come out of this period of time. And I think that a lot of us were too busy and too distracted before this. And so now we've had to downshift from second gear to first gear. And a lot of the distractions have been taken away. And we have the opportunity to focus on what really matters and what's really essential in our lives, right? And it comes down to our health, and recovery is part of that. Our being able to eat, have water, you know, do the basics, take care of ourselves, and connect with other people. And I think that the greatest challenge obviously has been connection, because we were used to seeing one another before. But in some ways, we can stay even more connected now on more intimate levels. I know, like with my friends, people that I talk to, because we're not seeing each other when we talk, it's really more intimate and focused. And the connections, a lot of them are a lot deeper. And the ones that didn't really matter anyway might have fallen away, but new connections can still be made. And we can deepen the ones that we already have, if we just have to make it a priority.
You have someone agreeing with you in the chat that they're, you know, totally agree, and there have been blessings. And I very much appreciate that 30 plus years of sobriety view on all the positive and all the opportunities that have been created as a result of this. I have to agree as well. I don't see any other specific questions coming through at this time. You did touch on a little bit, your practice and how to get in touch with you. Do you want to just kind of reiterate what it is, you're doing these days in your practice and your professional life, and then, your website again? I saw Caitlin posted that in the chat, but if you want to just kind of touch on that one more time as we close this out, that would be great.
Sure, Tom. Thank you. Again, my name is Dr. Anita Gaudia Smith. My phone number, office number is 202-714-0000. That's 202-714-0000. My website is, and this is one word, FromAddictionToRecovery.com. And I'm a psychotherapist in the Washington, D.C. area. And I specialize with addiction and recovery issues as well as relationship issues. And also, I would add to that family of origin issues, including narcissistic abuse, recovery, and others. And I am seeing patients working full-time. I can also work with you through teletherapy if you're not comfortable coming into an office. And I have 5 books that I have written. They're all available on Amazon.com or through my website. And I'm also doing a lot of writing during COVID for various media publications. I do a weekly column for people who are dating, which is always interesting, especially now. And also U.S. News and World Report and various television interviews. They're all available on my website. So thank you so much for having me. And I am so grateful for Caron and all of the wonderful work that you do to make the world a better place.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gaudia Smith, for your time and preparing this and joining us today. It was really, really great, and I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us and for participating in this presentation as well. Please save the date for Thursday, October 15th, as we welcome our next speaker, Barbara Klein, who will speak on the topic of chronic pain. Watch your email for more details on how to register for that. And in the meantime, should you have any questions, if we can be a resource in any way, shape, or form, please feel free to contact me here at Encore Outpatient Services in Arlington, Mallory Schwartzman at Maryland Addiction Recovery Center, Jess Ayer, who represents Caron Treatment Centers in the state of Maryland, and James Flentjay, who represents Caron Treatment Centers in Washington, D.C. and the state of Virginia. Thanks again, everybody, for your time and for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon.